In these tutorials we're going to be looking at the XNA framework and how we can actually use this to design and build games for an Xbox 360 or for the Windows platforms. Now the first thing that we're going to look at is really about how to visualize components, so how to draw text on the screen or pictures. And to do this we need to first add some assets into our contents folder. Now the type of assets that we can add, basically we could add some XML files for our levels, we could have images, videos, audio for music and sound effects, or sprite fonts. And we're going to look at doing a sprite font. So in the contents, I want you to right click on the contents icon, click on add, and then click on a new folder. And I'm going to just create a folder called fonts. And then on the fonts folder I want to right click, highlight add, click on a new item, and we are going to add a sprite font. And I'm just going to call this font1 sprite font. And then we wait for it to add it into our program. And here we can see it's come up. The key things to look at are the font name. Here the font name is Kootenai. Then we have the font size, the spacing, and really you can change stuff. Here's regular, you can change this to italic or other things. And this is our sprite font. And I'm going to just close that. Now we need to load our sprite font. And to do this we need to create a sprite font variable. So somewhere in your game 1 class, call up a sprite font. And I'm just going to call this game font 1. And then in the load content, and it has to be either in the load content or after, but generally we load all our content within the load content. So we're going to load our sprite font here, this font1.sprite font, into our variable. So the way to do this is to go game font 1 equals, and then we're going to use a keyword called content dot, and it's capital C as well, load, because we're going to load some content in. That's the way to remember it. Then we do an open left arrow, and what we're going to do is it's the type of content that we're loading. So if we were going to load in a texture or a texture 2D, we would type in texture 2D. And if we were going to load in a video, we'd have video, like so. But in this case, it is a sprite font, so we just type in sprite font. And then we close off with a right arrow, sorry. Now that we've told what actually we're going to load, i.e. a sprite font, we need to tell it where it is located. So we open bracket, we put in a double speech mark, and then we put it in the path. Now automatically further up you will notice that we have contents.root directory equals content, and all that is saying is the actual main directory where all our content is stored is in the folder here, content, which I've just highlighted. So because we know that that's where we are already, we don't need to enter content, we can just enter fonts. Now normally in Windows it's backslash, but in this case we're going to enter 2. And then what we do is we enter our font, in this case font 1. Now we don't need to do the extension. The .sprite font can be ignored, and in fact for any extension that we're loading we don't really need to use the extension name when we are using load content or content.load. So we've give it our path. I'm just going to close it off with a bracket and speech marks on that, and a colon to finish off the line. So here what we're saying is the game font 1, which is a sprite font, we're going to load the content. The content type is sprite font as indicated by the selected bit, and the directory to where this font is located is here. And now if I was to run the code, the only reason I'm doing this is to make sure that we haven't got any errors, we should hopefully see a blue window. And here we have. So here we have a blue window, and that is all that we wanted. And now we're going to use a spritebatch to actually output our sprite font on the screen. Now we've already had, if I scroll up you'll see we've already had a spritebatch declared. Here we have a spritebatch variable, and it is also called spritebatch with a small s instead of a capital, and that's the way that we identify them. So before we can use a spritebatch to draw, we need to begin it. We need to tell the graphics card that this spritebatch is about to start rendering stuff in memory. So what we do is we do spritebatch.begin, open and close, dot begin, open and close brackets, a colon on the end. And then we need to specify the end of our sprite batch, spritebatch.end. Now, in here, in between this begin and end, is where we draw everything connected with this sprite batch. So I want to draw some text on the screen, so I'm going to enter spritebatch.draw string, open bracket, then it asks for a sprite font, in this case game font 1. Then we have the string text, in this case I'm just going to type in hello. And then the position, I'm going to say a new vector 2 and then the coordinates 500, 400. So it will move 500 pixels on the horizontal and move down 400 pixels on the vertical. And then color dot white. Now I will run this and you will see that hopefully it will run no problems. And here you can see it says hello on the blue screen. Now I'm just going to show you what happens if we try drawing this text outside the sprite font, the sprite batch. So we can see it begins here and it ends here. And then after that I'm actually trying to draw using the sprite batch. So I'm going to run this and you'll see the error, and it'll just help you recognize the type of errors that you can get. We've got a problem and it's processing the problem as we speak. Here we are, and it's highlighted in yellow, the line, and it says an invalid operator expectation. Begin must be called successfully before draw can be called. And as you can see, what has happened, we've began and we've ended. So we've tried drawing using the sprite batch to draw when we can't, and that's the error that can come up. There are other types of errors. Let's say we forget to end our sprite batch, it will kick up another error. And this time the error is begin cannot be called again until end has been successfully called. So you see what's happened is it's run this draw, it's created it, it's outputted on this on the screen, and then the next time it runs it, it's tried to create the sprite batch again. And because it hasn't been ended, it kicks up an error. And those are just some of the errors that you might come across with a sprite batch. Now, we're going to have a look at some of the overloads we can use when drawing a string to the screen. Now, as you can see, here it says 1 of 6, and this means there are different variables we can pass in, or parameter pass, to do different things with the text. So I'm going to just click on the down arrow, and as you can see, it has changed something. And instead of a string, it has made it a system string builder, which we're going to ignore. So I'm going to press down again until we get to this one. So here, this allows us to rotate our sprite batch. And the differences are it needs a couple more variables. So let's have a look. We have our text, and it needs our position, which we've entered. It needs our color, which we've also entered. But it also needs a rotation. So I'm going to rotate by 0.1f. Now again, this is rotating using radians and not degrees. And then we've got vector 2 origin. Now the origin is the point of which we would like to rotate the object around. So currently I'm just going to set this to a vector 2.0, and I will show you the differences between these later on. Then we have scale, and I'm just going to stick in 1f for now. I'll show you the differences later on. We have sprite effects, and I'm going to set those sprite effects to none. And then we have the layer, which is always going to be 0. I very rarely mess around with a layer, so if you need to enter a layer, always enter it as 0, unless you know better. Now, as I run this code, I've just got to rebuild the code, you will see that the object is rotating. As rotated slightly, it is at an angle. Now, what we're going to do is, I want this object to rotate on its own. So every update it will rotate a little bit more. And to do that, we're going to create a variable. And I'm just going to create it here. I'm going to call it, it's going to be a float first of all, and I'm going to call it the rotation. I'm going to set it equal to 0. And in the update, I'm going to say that the rotation plus equals 0.01f. So every time the update is called, it will add 0.01 to the variable, the rotation. And then here at 0.1f, where it's the amount that I want to rotate the text by, I'm going to enter the rotation. Now if I run this, it will rotate the object by the variable the rotation, and of course the rotation is getting added to every update, and as you can see, hello is rotating. Now this is where I'm going to show you what the origin is. Now you can actually see that it is rotating above the H at the left, so it's rotating at 0, 0. Let's say I was to make it rotate at a different place. A new rotation, new vector 2 minus 100 minus 100. So in this case, it is rotating a lot further up, and I know you can't see the mouse at this moment in time, but it is rotating more or less 100 pixels up and to the left of the H, as you can see, like so. Now though, I want it to rotate in the centre, and this is where you've just got to find the centre. So I'm going to start off by saying 50, 20, and then I'll run it. And you can see, well, I didn't exactly get the centre because now it seems to be rotating nearer the O. So I'm going to say 10 and 25. And eventually you'll be able to get the correct origin point if you wanted to rotate it down the middle. Now we're going to have a look at the scale variable, where we've set it to 1f. So if I was set it to 2f, f because it is a float by the way, it will be twice as big. If I set it to 4f, it will be 4 times as big, as you can see. And if I was to set it to 0.2f, it will be 5 times smaller. In fact, you can barely see it. And that is how the scale variable works. The last thing we're going to look at is the sprite effects. Currently we did sprite effects.none, but I could do sprite effects.flip vertically, and what will happen is it will flip the image vertically. As you can see, hello is upside down, and then again I could make it flip horizontally and run it, and it would flip it horizontally like so. And that is really all you ever will need to know about drawing with a string. Now these things like the rotation and the origin and the scale and the sprite effects, these also apply using a spritebatch to draw an image to the screen, and we're going to look at that in the next chapter.